Is your company truly sellable? Whether you want to transition out in the next year or the next decade, the decisions you make today determine whether you walk away with maximum value or just auction off your equipment and shut the doors. My guest today is Cameron Bishop, Managing Director at Raincatcher and one of the top sell-side advisors in the lower middle market. Cameron specializes in construction businesses, and he's here to break down the real reasons deals stall, how buyers assess risk, and what you must do in the next 12 months to be buyer ready. If you care about the legacy of your business, the future of your people, and the financial payoff you've earned through decades of hard work, this episode is essential. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Cameron, welcome to Construction Genius.
Eric, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure, thank you. My name is Cameron Bishop. I'm a partner and managing director with a lower middle market investment banking firm called Raincatcher based out of Denver. I'm actually based in Kansas City, and I handle and specialize in construction industry related sell-side transactions, representing privately held and family-owned businesses in the construction sector at the time they choose to sell the company.
Okay. So you have a very interesting job.
I do, actually. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I bet. What are the most common reasons construction M&A deals stall during due diligence, and which fixes move the needle the fastest?
There could be several factors that impact that. One of the biggest factors we see is when these business owners are not properly organized. They're unable to find a lot of documentation that they need that buyers are going to ask for, everything from corporate organizational records to copies of contracts. In particular, if any contracts they have require signability, meaning that the person or the company that they have a contract with has the right to cancel that contract if the owner of the company sells to someone else. So that can be a big holding point because the seller of the business has to go back to the customer with the contract and try to negotiate assignability. Or many times buyers will walk if they don't have full assignability across all contracts, or they'll discount the terms of the deal.
Interesting. You know, one of the big challenges in construction that a lot of folks come across when it comes to selling their business is that their businesses are built on the quality of the relationships that they have. And then other than the equipment that they have in the organization, where does the value of the business actually lie for an outside buyer?
That depends on the scale, i.e. revenue or size of the company in general. And it also depends on the reputation of the company brand, as opposed to simply the senior leader or owner of the business. In smaller companies, a lot of the times it's what we refer to as owner dependency. If the owner is the key point of contact for any of the customers who's out doing the majority, if not all, of the business development work, that's a real red flag for buyers. I was on a call with a potential client a couple of weeks ago, and they have a 1-800 number. And one of our questions on our kind of sell-side diligence work that we do was, are all of your potential clients calling the 1-800 number? And he very proudly and openly stated that no, everybody calls his cell phone. and that is, like, frankly, it can be just a kiss of death for anybody that wants to buy that business, because ironically, people who are buying companies are willing to accept risk. But at the same time, ironically, they're also quite risk averse, and they look for a lot of boxes that have to be checked in order to confirm that they are mitigating or minimizing as much risk as possible. Owner dependency is one of the really big ones.
Yeah, that's huge. Okay, so let's kind of go 50,000 feet here and begin to get down to brass tacks. If you had to hand a contractor a one-page, 12-month buyer-ready checklist, what absolutely must be on it and why?
Yeah, there are about 6 or 7 that are really critical. And these are the ones that, so we get tons of referrals and inbound leads from business owners wanting to sell their company. And again, if it's construction, those all come to me.
Right.
And we go through a standard sort of initial set of questions. First one we always go through is, okay, why are you contacting us? Why are you interested in selling? And because that's going to be a key driver in how we help represent them. But the next question is going to be, talk to me about your financial reporting. And that's where things begin to fall apart immediately. Many of them pay very little attention to their accounting. They don't use it as a strategic tool. Most often they are on what's referred to as a cash basis, which is fine for tracking your revenue and managing your taxes and distributions at the end of the year. But that does not help buyers. They want to see accrual-based accounting and ideally GAAP compliant, GAAP, General Accepted Accounting Principles compliant. The reason for that is buyers want to measure gross profits and gross profit margins because every sector of the construction industry, and the term construction industry is a very broadly defined term, and there are real nuances and differentiators based on each of these individual sections. And buyers are savvy if they're interested in buying any type of construction company. They're going to know what the gross profit margins are, and they're going to want to see that in the company they're looking at buying. But if they're not on an accrual accounting basis, the expenses required to generate the revenue aren't directly correlated. So the buyers can't determine what the actual true cost to deliver the revenue are. And that usually requires either the buyer will walk or they will require the seller to go back and do a very laborious and onerous restatement of their financials so that it aligns their costs with the revenue. And that's a huge barrier for a lot of these. And sometimes that can take months.
Yeah.
And I've seen it take a year or 2 years to get the accounting straight.
Yeah. So that's almost like the first thing you gotta do, sounds like, is get your financial house in order from a reporting perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And a big part of that is, again, because besides the fact that the buyers want to see accrual-based accounting so that they can truly validate the gross profit level and the margin, buyers all borrow money to buy a company.
Right.
They don't just spend all cash. And they go to banks to get that money that's in the loan, and the banks require accrual-based accounting. So even if the buyer was flexible on it, the banks aren't going to be. Right. And they're not going to get the backing they need.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we've got the idea of the why, the financial reporting. What's next on that buyer-ready checklist?
Next is what we touched on just a second ago, and that's the level of owner dependency in the company.
Yeah.
Buyers want to know, obviously, when we get calls from buyers about a company, the first question again they ask is, all right, why is the owner wanting to sell?
Right.
Most cases, it's because they want to retire. Mm-hmm. In some cases, they just want to take some chips off the table. They want to continue to run the business, but they want to bring in a capital partner, and they want to sort of diversify their own financial risk by cashing in some of their equity, but continuing on in the business. More often than not, though, they want to retire. And if they don't have a successor in place, the buyers are either, again, not going to want to do the deal, or they're going to require that owner to stay on for an extended period of time because, again, they view that owner's market knowledge, customer relationships as invaluable. And if that owner walks or leaves too soon, it's a risk factor for them.
Yeah. Okay, so the owner dependency, the financial reporting. What other elements? Anything else that they take into consideration?
Again, as I mentioned, succession planning is a critical element to help diffuse or diminish the owner dependency factor.
Yeah.
Because there's the old, what happens if the owner proverbially goes out and gets hit by a bus
Right.
the day or the month after the buyer buys the business? Who's going to step in and operate the business? The challenge for most of these business owners from the standpoint of succession planning is, A, they don't really think about it. They don't understand the critical importance when it comes to value creation. And because most of these entities are pass-through entities, meaning they're LLCs or S corps, where distributions show up in their income at the end of the year, investing in a key manager as a successor, if they don't already have that position in place, well, that's going to diminish the distributions they take at the end of the year.
Right.
But they don't realize that the ROI for investing into that pays great dividends when it does come time to sell the business.
Let me look at that from a slightly different angle in terms of the succession planning. Sometimes people are in the business because of the owner. They're working because they like the owner.
Right?
And if the owner's no longer there, then it really loosens their dependence on the business and gets them looking elsewhere. How does an outside buyer evaluate that in terms of retaining the talent in the organization once the original owner departs?
Well, in any case, or in almost all cases, the owner is going to stay on either in a direct employment capacity under a management contract or on a consulting basis, typically for a minimum of a year, often longer for that knowledge transfer. And when, again, as part of our work as an investment banker representing these owners, we spend, to sell a company, I and my partners will, believe it or not, invest 250, 300 man hours of our time. And we get to know our clients extremely well. We have to know their family, their history, their kids, etc. So we are able to kind of assess what's valuable and important to them and sort of what kind of a corporate culture they have established. And we sort of jokingly say part of our job as an investment banker is not to just, be shrewd negotiators and dollars and cents, but we're sort of a match.com as well. We try to align the style and values of buyers with the needs of our clients. So that helps, again, mitigate some of that risk that a buyer who buys a business might have his employees walk if a new buyer comes in with an entirely different mindset on corporate culture. But if the owner is focused on motivating and properly compensating at least his key managers, that again helps that retention. And oftentimes buyers want to know who the other key employees are in the company. And sometimes we recommend that our sell side clients establish what we refer to as a stay bonus for these key managers and key employees, which it's typically structured from the standpoint that they have once the sale closes, they have negotiated a certain amount of money that's going to be a bonus for those key employees. Let's say hypothetically it's $10,000. The employee will get $5,000 of that when the deal closes. And if they stay for a year and they are not terminated without cause, then at the end of that first year, they get the rest of that money. Now, typically it's a lot more than $10,000.
Sure.
That's a hypothetical. So that gives the buyer of the business some comfort and insurance that they're going to keep key employees and gives them a year to sort of integrate those teams, readjust compensation, and oftentimes issue shares of equity to those key employees as the new owner of the business.
Interesting. How often does that happen, that equity incentive?
Well, since more and more the construction industry, again, in its entirety, some sectors are hotter than others, but financial buyers, particularly private equity firms, are very attracted to these industries today. And it's a fairly common practice that when they buy the business, they reserve, usually it's 10% of the newco equity so that they can award key employees some of that equity so they've got some skin in the game and some upside somewhere down the road, which is usually a 5-year period. Can be as little as 3, maybe as much as 7, but typically the private equity hold is 5 years, and then they can get a nice bonus when the company is sold off again,
Right.
and they get some rewards from the equity that they hold.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview. Why is construction hot at the moment, do you think, or some sectors hot?
Well, in a lot of categories, there is a general phenomenon. So the term is called the silver tsunami. The metric is that apparently something like 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every day. And the interesting phenomenon is, in the culture we have today, is a generation ago, if a business owner wanted to retire, he generally worked out some kind of a transition with one or more of his children to step in and run the business.
Right.
But in modern times, and we hear this every single week, sometimes every day, the owner is left with no option but to sell outright because their children have no interest in working in the company.
Right.
And that creates an opportunity for financial buyers in particular, or other larger strategics in the same industry, to step in and buy these companies. But the financial buyers like it because they execute what's called a roll-up. So they will go out and buy a whole bunch of these companies and consolidate them into one much larger entity, hold it, as I mentioned, for about 5 years, and they resell it. And the basic rule of thumb is small companies get a small multiple of EBITDA as the valuation. Bigger companies get a bigger multiple. So the key play financially for the private equity firms is they sell for a higher exit multiple, and they get what's called an arbitrage on the exit multiple. It creates returns. Sometimes they target 20%, could be 30. I've seen 100 before.
Okay, so it's interesting. You make the distinction between financial versus strategic. I'm assuming financial is we're going to buy you and sell you in the future. Strategic is we're going to buy you and we're going to keep you. Is that right?
That is correct. It's part of an expansion plan for a strategic.
Absolutely. So as you're counseling the folks who come to you wanting to sell their companies, how do you work through someone's reluctance to sell to a financial buyer as opposed to a strategic buyer? Because some of the pushback that when I've talked to my clients, they'll say, Eric, I don't really want to sell to a financial buyer because I value my employees and I want them to have a place that they can be secure with for a number of years, as opposed to a financial buyer who may do a variety of things to the company that the original owner would not want them to do.
Well, first, that is a fantastic question. So again, as we get to know our clients, we want to understand their priorities, and we use that in terms of when we do our outreach marketing to reach potential buyers. We will prioritize one kind of a buyer versus another based on their requirements. And it's our job not to tell them who to sell to, but to educate them so that they can make the most informed decision moving forward. So if I have an owner who tells me I don't want to sell to strategics, I'm going to share, there are pros and cons to both. And it's an unsafe assumption to think that if they sell to a strategic, that the strategic's not going to go in and make tons of organizational changes. I had a client in the mining industry just in the last year, actually the last 8 months, large business, road construction, mill and fill work, asphalt manufacturing, and they actually chose to sell to a strategic, which paid a lower price on a multiple basis than the financial buyers would have.
Yes.
Because that was his choice. It wouldn't have been my choice if it was my choice to make.
Right.
It's our choice to present them with buyer options that they can make the call that's right for them personally. But we educate them on the pros and cons of each. With a strategic buyer, you might often be able to do a deal where the buyer will pay all cash if they're a big enough strategic because they have enough cash on their balance sheet. That's often attractive. A financial buyer is rarely ever going to pay all cash, but the trade-off is they may want the owner to roll over some equity, which can be highly attractive, and they often make more money on the second bite of the apple or when the company gets resold again if they just roll over 20% than the 80% they originally sold. But there could be what are called seller notes, there could be earnouts, and again, that's part of our job to identify where those parts of the structure might come into place. Ironically, everybody thinks that the financial buyers are going to come in and change everybody out, but typically that doesn't occur because the buyer sees that as huge risk. These businesses are all highly dependent on the people.
Yes.
Yeah, they may want to change a senior manager or something at some point, or we often see they bring in professional accounting help like a CFO or head of HR if they need some kind of back office key support. But we don't typically see that as a matter of course, but certainly there's risk in either case that there could be that kind of change.
Okay, so as you're talking here, I've identified 3 areas that someone has to consider when they're selling their business. The first one would be, how do I want to get paid? Do I want cash now, or am I willing to get paid out over time? Am I hearing that correctly?
The typical deal structure today is a case where, let's just take a hypothetical. Let's say a seller, owner of a business is being offered $10 million for his business.
Yes.
A typical structure today might be they get $6 million of that as cash on closing.
Yep.
And they carry back a seller note for $1 million of that, which is typically a 3 to 5 year period at market interest rates. Sometimes there's only an interest payment in the first year or two. And sometimes there's what's called a balloon payment for the total payoff at the end of the 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a private equity firm, maybe even a family office, they might want that seller to roll over 20% of that purchase price as equity in the new legal entity that they're going to create when they buy the business. And then they're going to layer on their own equity and debt to fill the rest of that gap. So that's a fairly common. I sold a fascinating business that was a specialist in high-end customized windows and doors.
Yeah.
For mega mansions, $20 million, $100 million mansions. And they had an incredible future pipeline going 2 years out.
Right.
And it took them sometimes a year to 2 years to get the contract for that. So they'd already done the vast majority of the work. And we felt it was only fair for them to get paid for that future pipeline that was on contract, deposits had been made. Mm. So we structured a special program for them where they have, if they hit their goals for those contracted jobs over the next 2 years, then they are incentivized on an earnout basis for that. The buyer's not going to pay for that up front. No bank would support that up front.
Yes.
But if it's delivered, they got huge upside additional valuation. The only trade-off was they're not going to get 100% of it on closing of the deal, but they got far more than they would have if we weren't able to negotiate that future earnings for them.
So that's interesting. I could see then how bringing someone like yourself in would be so critical to be able to walk through these different options and these different potential structures, and to lay those out so that the seller of the business would have a clear picture of what could potentially happen as a result of the decisions they make.
Absolutely. That's a absolute mandatory obligation in our ability to communicate with them effectively and help them understand the pros and cons, the choices, the trade-offs, and the ramifications of all the aspects of a deal. Because so far, I've been with the firm 5 years, and 100% of my clients have never done or sold a company before.
Yeah,
so the entire process is foreign to them. It can be scary, intimidating. It's a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And a lot of our work often is what I also refer to as Dr. Phil work.
Yeah.
To help them through this process. It's an emotional roller coaster ride.
Of course it is.
And it's a 9 to 10 month process from start to finish.
I'm curious, do you all have any fiduciary responsibility in your role?
Well, our fiduciary responsibility is to our client is to effectively represent them and try to bring them the buyer options, as many as we possibly can.
Sure.
And those that fit the parameters that they choose. So almost every one of our clients says, I do not want you to contact the X company, the Y company, the Z company, because they're competitors.
Yes.
We're extremely sensitive about confidentiality.
Yep.
And so we go to great lengths to vet potential buyers to meet their criteria.
Okay. So then the other considerations I was thinking about as you were speaking earlier is we've got this whole idea of how we're going to structure the deal. And that has to be what comes into play there is the owner's concern with perhaps maintaining culture. And I'll give you an illustration. I have a client who recently sold his business internally. Mm-hmm. And like you were describing earlier, he took a haircut on the deal because he wanted to sell it to internal employees and keep the culture as opposed to selling it externally. So that's one consideration. And then the other one that I saw was how much involvement you want post-deal. So, if you're going to be selling your company, I would assume some people come to you and they say, Cameron, I want out in the next year. And then they need some counseling as far as that's concerned, because there's not going to be a lot of buyers, from what I'm hearing from you, who are going to be willing to make the purchase if the owner wants a very quick exit.
You're spot on, Eric, because again, when we're first talking to these owners and we ask them, why are you selling and what are your priorities and what is your timeline? So if they tell us that they want to be out, they want to be done in a year, we're going to try to find them a buyer that's willing to accept that, but we're going to educate them and tell them it's going to reduce the potential pool of buyers in general, and it's likely going to impact either the total enterprise value that buyer is willing to pay, or it's going to impact the deal structure, or both. Because again, as I said, buyers are willing to take risk by buying the company, but at the same time, they're going to do everything they can to mitigate that risk. And a business owner who wants to leave early, that's a real factor. So here's another real world example. We sold a slurry seal business, and one of the owners wanted to be out in a fairly short period of time. He was number two, but he was really critical in the field operations. And so we structured a deal with him. We were upfront with the buyers. All of our clients go on a management contract. And in my past life, I spent 35 years on the buy side. So I've negotiated tons of management contracts for my employees and for myself. So it's actually not technically part of an investment banker's job, but I often counsel my clients on what terms and factors they want to see in a management contract. So with this one in particular, he worked full-time, 40 hours a week in the business for the first 3 months. Then we gradually began to ratchet him down to 20 hours a week for the next 3 months, and then 10 hours. And then he was available by phone for a minimum of, I think it was 20 hours a month. And that satisfied the buyer that they still had access to him and his knowledge, and they could call him in if they needed him. That met the needs of that individual manager, and we got a win-win out of it.
Do you guys work with internal sales as well as external?
You mean if the owner wants to sell to other management in the company?
Yeah.
Yeah, we sure can, because there are before I became an investment banker, I spent 5 years as a partner in a boutique consulting firm doing exit and transition planning, and that's exactly the kind of thing we did. There can be a lot of emotional dynamics that go into that kind of, especially if the internal candidates happen to be related to the owner.
Yes.
So we play a dual role in those cases. We can help provide reasonable estimates of valuation so that they know they're playing fairly, and suggest deal structures and help define management roles in the process and transition plans. Yeah, we would structure our compensation differently than an outright sale, but
Of course.
we certainly have some experience in that capacity.
One of the first roadblocks that I often come across when discussing with clients about selling their businesses is their perspective on the value of their business is often quite different than the market's perspective on the value of their business. So as you begin to engage with a client and start to have those discussions, what steps do you take to help the owner to see the actual value of their business as the market sees it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm kind of smiling, laughing, because I've yet to meet a potential new client who didn't think his or her company was worth more than it actually is.
Yeah.
So here's how our process works. Eric, if you called me today and said, hey, Cam, I'm thinking about selling my company, we would sign an NDA with you, and we would ask you to upload the last 3 years of your monthly income statements and balance sheets to a secure digital location where it's used by investment bankers. One of my partners is a licensed CPA and spent 15 years in the audit practice with KPMG. Mm-hmm. We would go through your numbers with a fine-tooth comb, identify any extraordinary or extraneous expenses that a buyer for your business would not incur. So let's say, for example, you booked a family vacation to the company. Right. Obviously, a buyer, you're driving a Ferrari and charging it to the company.
Yep.
We've seen, so we call it excess owner benefit. So we're going to identify all that, carve it out, and come up with a recasted set of financials and an adjusted EBITDA number. So we try to work to identify the optimal amount of legitimate, ethical EBITDA profits that the business will generate for a new buyer. And because, again, we do so many deals in the construction industry, we understand the market, we understand, by and large, the 10 of the buyers and what the general multiples are. And again, these companies are valued based on a multiple of their EBITDA profits. And different buyers will make their own value judgment. Some will look at the last 12 months. It's called trailing 12 months. Some will look at the last year. Some will take a 2-year average or a 3-year average, and that's the kind of evaluation that they will apply. We go to market on all of our deals on what we refer to as an open bid basis. So we don't want to set the price and end up negotiating against ourselves. And these owners have to understand at the end of the day, the market's going to set the price, not us.
Yes.
We're going to give these owners to help them decide if they want to sell. We don't try to throw some highball number out there at them to get them to engage with us. That's a lose-lose proposition because, again, we invest hundreds of hours. And if we set a high expectation they can't get it, they're likely to walk. So we try to give them a low end on a range that we think it will sell for, the midpoint, which we think is the most likely range, and then kind of a high end range. And we like to underpromise and overdeliver. And we've pretty consistently seen that we've been able to leverage bids against each other and work the deal structure up in terms of price, terms, fit, etc., to kind of help over-deliver. But the market's going to set the price, and we'll give them that information. And we have a number of clients who say, hey, that's not what I want. I want more. I'm going to hold off and keep growing my business for a year or two.
Yes.
We're fine with that. We just stay in touch with them and say, let's check in with you. How you coming? And then be ready to go when they're ready to go.
Okay. What are some of the red flags that would immediately disqualify a company from working with you? So they come to you and they say, Cam, I want to sell my business. You spend some time qualifying them. And there are red flags where you say, you know what, we're just not a fit for you.
That does happen on occasion. I have never tried to talk a business owner into selling, but I have talked numerous business owners out of selling based on their criteria. What I was sharing was not in their best interest, at least not at that point in time. So we kind of talked about the owner dependency issue. That's oftentimes it's a yellow flag, it's not a red flag.
Yeah.
The accounting is a red flag for sure. It's kind of fascinating and is increased in commonality. So again, when we reach out to let potential buyers know about a deal we're marketing, and we set up a call with them, we do a video call just like this to vet them and answer their questions and make sure they're qualified and a fit. After they ask us about the owner's motives and desires, the next question they ask us, Eric, is, do they have customer concentration?
Yes.
And everybody asks that now.
Okay.
Everybody.
Okay.
And the general litmus test number is, or percentage, is 20%. And I've had many interested buyers say, we're out.
So what that means is that if they have a more than 20% concentrating in one customer.
In one customer.
So not necessarily one market type, one project
No.
type, but one customer.
It's one customer.
Okay.
Yes.
Why 20%? That sounds, I know the 80-20 rule pops into your head, but why is it 20%?
Well, they don't really explain that. I guess that's where they see their risk tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give a real quick example of why they have that. So this was in an unrelated industry, but the principle is the same. So I had a client in the marketing and advertising space,
Mm-hmm.
and one of his clients was a massive hospital chain that had like 50 locations.
Yep.
And when we went to market, we brought 6 offers in for that business, but none of them would offer any cash on closing because that large hospital chain in aggregate represented 50% of his business. And he argued that he was making 50 separate sales calls that had 50 separate buyers. But a new senior executive came in to run the hospital chain, and boom, like that.
Yep.
He lost his contract. He lost 50% of his business, and his business literally became unsellable. So
Yes.
all these investment firms, private equity, they have what they call an investment thesis, where they have a established laundry list of criteria, and the common number is 20%.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. All right. Now, this is really informative. I want to go back. You mentioned earlier that construction is hot at the moment, and we tied that to the silver tsunami and the fact that businesses are available. They're on the market. Which sectors do you see as the hottest? Could you name some construction sectors that would be really attractive to those outside buyers?
Sure. So on a macro level, and this goes back to the Biden administration with the huge infrastructure bill that was passed.
Yes.
Any kinds of construction businesses, and these are generally heavier industry construction companies, they're doing road work and bridges and earth moving and that sort of thing. Those are all infrastructure companies.
Yep.
And they have, every state got allocations from the federal infrastructure bill, and they're still spending through that.
Yep.
So that's a very attractive category. But the key differentiator within that category is the percentage of revenue that's derived from new construction projects versus maintenance, repair, and replacement. The new construction area is a very tough sell.
Yes.
Because it's all project contract dependent.
Yes.
These buyers love the maintenance, repair, replacement because that's never going to end.
Yes.
It's far less recession. It's far more recession proof or subject to economic interest rate factors.
Yes.
So those are very attractive categories within any construction sector, period.
Yes.
Right now, I have several clients in the various parts of the residential construction market, That's an extremely difficult area of construction right now because of the uncertainties around the housing markets, lack of new permits being let, and interest rates, and
Yes.
potential for buyers and inaccessibility.
Yep.
Now, it will come back around again, but because all the metrics say there is a massive shortage of housing in America.
Yes.
But buyers are a bit contrarian and they don't buy into a down market for the most part. So that's kind of a tough. It doesn't matter whether the construction company is making construction products or materials for that sector, or they're a distributor or value-added distributor or a subcontractor of a certain extent.
Yes. Okay. Now you hit on something essential here. And I think one of the things I just want to make a point of to the audience is you may not be thinking about selling your business in the next 3 to 5 years. But if you're listening to this, you're learning principles that you can apply well in advance so that your business is far more sellable in the future. So one thing that you hit on here is the dichotomy or the difference between new projects and maintenance. And this is one of the keys because a lot of construction companies simply go from project to project to project and they wonder why they can't sell their business. I was thinking about with the heavy civil specifically, you have an opportunity there to structure your business in such a way that you not only have that maintenance aspect to it, but many companies in that sector have not only construction, but they also have a material side of their business. Do you find those types of companies are also very attractive to a client?
They certainly can be. Again, I mentioned earlier, we very successfully sold an 800-acre aggregate mining operation in Arizona that had 3 asphalt manufacturing plants.
Yeah.
But they did mill and fill asphalt work on, I think it was 200 to 300 linear miles of state highway as well.
Yeah.
And the diversity of their business was very attractive for buyers.
Yep.
And they sat on a substantially valuable amount of inventory in terms of, I think they had like 32 different specs of aggregate as part of their operation. And it also diversified their customer base because they actually not only used their materials in their own work, which gave them a strategic advantage from a pricing standpoint and access to materials, but they sold to even their competitors. So they had additional revenue streams that they wouldn't otherwise have. They didn't do commercial work, but they got access to the commercial market through some of the contractors that did that work and came to them for the raw materials.
Okay, so let me summarize here and give me your feedback. One word that's in my mind right now is this idea of diversity. And diversity from two different perspectives. Number one, diversity of client base, so that I'm not just stuck with that 20% over 20% ratio, but also then diversity of businesses in terms of having service in your organization or maintenance or materials. That's essential to make your business attractive to an outside buyer. So that's one pillar. The other one is the quality of the people that you have in your organization. And that speaks to whether or not everything is dependent on you as the owner and whether you have a strong bench of people that an outside buyer can see, I've got some key people in place for the next few years. And then the third one is having excellent financial reporting so that an outside buyer can easily take a look at your numbers and see what's real there as opposed to what's not. Am I following and tracking well there?
You are exactly correct, Eric. And there are two more subtle, but also very critical aspects of the owner dependency factor that every buyer for any kind of business that has to bid contracts is going to ask. And oftentimes, again, it's that owner who's doing all of the contract bidding.
Right.
And again, that's just a huge red flag for buyers. So I think it's important that these owners know that they should have at least secondary, if not fully trained individuals who can focus on and be the primary source of going out and doing the bids. The same with going out and doing the business development or the sales work. And as part of that bidding process, every one of my clients is asked, what kind of systems are you using to do that? A lot of these companies have been around for decades, and it's in the owner's head, or if he's got a bid person, it's in their head, or they're just doing it on spreadsheets. They're not using any of the modern software programs that buyers are going to look for. And if they're integrating this business with others, they want that continuity in the bid process across all of the companies that they're acquiring. And that's not often recognized as two really critical factors in the valuation of these companies.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because the BD one, the business development one, is kind of self-explanatory, but the estimating one, the bidding one, is a little more subtle and very, very important to point out. So I appreciate that. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, a ton of great information. Give us well, let me say this. If a contractor wanted to be fully transferable and buyer ready 12 months from today, and you may be repeating a little bit of stuff here, but that's okay, just for summary's sake, what are the first 3 actions they should take?
Take a look at your accounting. Do you have the right people handling your accounting? Are you cash-based or accrual-based? If not, get it changed. And once you have accrual-based accounting, focus on your gross profit and your gross profit margin. There are tons of industry associations out there. You can usually benchmark the industry averages for gross profit. And if you're above the average, good for you. You're probably going to get it more attractive bids. If you're at the average, it's a net neutral. It's either positive or negative. If you're below it, again, the questions we get asked for buyers, if you're below the industry average on gross profit margin, they're either going to drill down to understand why, to determine if it can be fixed or not, or many times they walk because you're below that number. It's more difficult to control your cost of goods and materials than it is your what's called SG&A, sales, general administrative costs, which could be adjusted or more flexible to get to your net income or your EBITDA profit. So they've got to use their accounting as a strategic decision-making tool. Again, we talked about the succession planning. We talked about diversifying so you don't have anybody above 20% from a customer concentration standpoint. So those are kind of the big factors to look for first.
Excellent. So the accounting, the succession planning, the diversity of customer base. And so you can do this even if you're not planning on selling your business in 12 months from now, you should be starting to do these things right away if you don't just want to, get to the end of your run, shut it down, sell the equipment, and then ride off into the sunset.
That's correct. They should also, again, tied with accounting, be paying attention to their future business pipeline. So how much do they have booked we're almost at the end of 2025. How much do they have booked for 2026 on contracts? Buyers are going to want to know that. Then they're going to ask, what did you have booked at the same time last year going into 2025? And if you're above that, that's going to help you get the company sold. If you're below that, that's at least a yellow flag, and they're going to want to understand why. So understanding and tracking future pipeline is really important, especially in project-driven businesses.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. All right, Cam, so tell us a little bit more about your company and how people can get in touch with you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so our firm is Raincatcher. It's an unusual name, but we believe it's easier to catch rain than it is to make rain. So hopefully people will remember us. We are what's referred to as a lower middle market investment bank. There are not many out there like us. So our clients all have essentially $1 million to $10 million in EBITDA profits. Those are companies that are really too big and too sophisticated for, let's call it a Main Street business broker. And they're too small for the big investment bank. So my partners and I, I'm one of 5 partners, we all come from bigger operations, and we brought the big bank tactics and techniques and marketing skills downstream to represent this market. So we actually, again, I specialize in construction industry type businesses, but we are very overall industry agnostic, anything from high-tech software through business services of all kinds. So we're a sell-side firm, so we represent these owners when they think it's time to sell.
Excellent. And how can people get in touch with you, please, Cam?
Yeah, so my email is cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. or I'm easily found on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. And the website for your business is raincatcher.com?
Raincatcher.com.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, I've been very much helped by this conversation. This was very informative, very detailed. Appreciate you taking the time, Cameron, and I do wish you the best.
I'm pleased to be here, and I hope it's been helpful for some of your listeners.
Yeah, I know it has. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to my discussion with Cameron. Hope you found it useful, insightful, helpful, all that good stuff. Give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Share it with other people who you think would benefit from listening to our discussion, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.